Do you want to improve your English speaking skills? Do you have this moment where you know you could do better, you know you can speak, but when you're supposed to speak, you somehow freeze up and you're like, no, I understand much more than I can say. We've all been there, and in this video, I'm gonna give you some tips on how to improve your English speaking skills. Hi, I am Stephanie and I love to have you back to my channel. If you're new, I'm a polyglot that loves languages and I love to make videos about language learning to help you become the best language learner you can be. In this video, I will try to speak slower. I have gotten this feedback that I can sometimes speak very quickly. And if you think I speak quickly in English, well, it's a good thing that this isn't a Spanish channel, because then I would be speaking ridiculously quickly. But yeah, in this video I want to go slower because I know that this is a video that probably most of you that are going to be watching this want to improve their English speaking skills, which would suggest you're not native speakers, and so I'm gonna do my best. Please bear with me, and if you find it too fast at some point, remember there's always this button in the settings to kind of slow it down a bit. So for those of you that are new and don't know my story with English, I actually started really early on when I was 6. You know, I learned it throughout school, but a lot of the times school instruction is not enough to become fluent in a language. You know that, I've said that many times on this channel. And really, I think a lot of my success with this language was due to the fact that I would study by myself, even as a kid, because I always loved language learning. So I suppose I was always able to find ways to make it fun. And I would consume a lot of content in English. Really, content-based learning is what I'm a lot about. So I even did that back then before I knew anything. When I was, for example, in middle school or high school mostly. During high school, I had the opportunity to do an exchange year in the US in Washington, D.C., where I had the opportunity to go to Washington International School and to study a lot of the subjects in English. But even in my high school, we had, especially, I believe it was the first year of high school, where, you know, after an intensive year of English study, we would have a lot of subjects in English, and that also really helped. But later, you know, living in the US for a year, of course, that helps. And then my higher education is entirely in English. So I did a bachelor's degree here at the American University in Bulgaria, where I'm from. And then after that, I did a master's degree, an MBA to be exact, and in the US that is usually 2 years. That is the classic. And I did that for 2 years at the NYU Stern School of Business in New York City. And now in my everyday life, I use English every single day because in my job in the corporate world, I work for a tech company and it's needed, of course. I'm giving you this background so you know where I'm coming from and you know what my experience with the language has been. I am not a native speaker, so I understand very well what you're going through, because I as well had to start English from scratch and learn to speak it well. So here are my best tips on how to do just that. Overarching theme number 1. Build your vocabulary. In order to speak well, you need to have a large vocabulary. It's a given. So how do you do that? I always suggest to do a lot of input, to do as much input as you can in terms of be it reading, be it listening, be it watching videos. Build out your vocabulary in a natural way by consuming content on topics you care about, as opposed to going over flashcards or something of the sort, because this way you're gonna hear the words in context or read them in context, etc. And so you're gonna be able to use those words later much more effectively in conversation once you've already seen them in a context, in a story, etc. And something that I find super useful when learning English, and something that actually really kickstarted my English skills back in the day when I was a student, that was movies and TV shows. They help so much. Oh my, you have no idea how instrumental they were in my ability to speak English. And if you'd like, I can actually make a video on TV shows and movies that I recommend for learning English, because that deserves a whole video on its own, or else this one is going to be over an hour. So let me know in the comments down below if you are interested in seeing a video like that from me. But in general, why movies and TV? Why is that so great? Why am I recommending that above all else when it comes to improving your speech? Why is that the best input? Because English is a ridiculously rich language. There's over 170,000 words in the English language by official dictionaries such as the Oxford Dictionary of English. It contains about that number of words. And by some estimates, there could be as many as 1 million if you count all of the different regional varieties, dialects, slang, etc. It's a super, super rich language. And you need to know what words are going to serve you in conversation. Newsflash, not all of the words are going to be needed. There's so many words that we don't need. If you're somebody, for example, that's taken English proficiency tests or college entry tests, then you know how it is. You know how many words in those tests are completely unnecessary. What I'm referring to here is things like the SATs or the GMAT. I have taken both tests. Of course, it studied in American universities for both my bachelor's and master's degrees, so I'm super familiar with those tests. There's a lot of times, in order to pass those tests, you need to learn a lot of words that are not in use in everyday life. You're not going to need to use the word precautious in your everyday speech. It's highly unlikely. And there's so many words like that you learn for this test and you think that that's going to make you fluent. But in reality, the way that we speak can be super different. And you learn that when you watch movies or TV shows. You learn a lot of that language. You learn so many slang words, expressions, etc. With TV, you learn the most common words in the English language. I know, you can Google them. You can Google the 1,000 most common words in the English language. But what you're gonna get is a huge list, and lists are not something we like on this channel. They're not gonna stick. You're not gonna be able to use those words in everyday language. It's gonna be super boring. Much better to consume content, and in particular with series and movies, you're gonna hear certain words repeated over and over again. You're gonna pick up naturally the most common words, and you're gonna build out your vocabulary that way. You're also gonna be able to see a lot of slang, for example. I'm gonna give you some examples from American English simply because that is something that is much closer to me. So for example, to bail on something, it doesn't mean to pay bail as in for jail or something like that. It means to give up. Or when you say this place is dead, the use of the word dead in that case, it means like nothing's happening, it's not the cool place, it's just like not the thing anymore. Or, ooh, this is sick, you have a great new car. Sick in this case would mean it's amazing, it's super cool, it's like really nice. You can translate it 1,000 different ways, but it doesn't mean literally sick as in ill. Or another word like flex, which means to boast, or when you win something cool, I don't know, like at a contest, you could say score. Or when you succeed with something in life, kind of this expression. A lot of the times you wouldn't say $100, you'd say $100. So all of those phrases for English are super needed when speaking, because you're gonna hear native speakers use a lot of slang. And in order to speak well, you need to be able to understand well. So you're gonna need those slang words. You're gonna need phrasal verbs, which again, there's many lists for that, but it's much easier to learn in context when you're watching your favorite series and you're kind of getting together with your favorite characters on the screen, and it's a whole different experience. Much easier to learn such phrasal verbs, like for example, break down. To break something down means to explain it in an understandable way, things like that. Popular English sayings, popular English idiomatic expressions, such as to throw a curveball, which comes from baseball, and it's a metaphor about, to kind of have an unexpected situation come up. All of that stuff is best learned through TV shows rather than formal academic books. Oh, another request for you. Do you want me to do a video on American slang? Let me know in the comments, because I can do that. And especially actually if you are a business professional and you want me to do a video on business slang, then let me know also in the comments below, because I've been in the consulting industry, for example, and boy, do they use a ton of slang in there. So yeah, if you're interested in business slash consulting slash finance slang, let me know, and I'll also make a video on that. Or if you just want a video on regular, everyday speech American slang, I can also do that. Just let me know in the comments. And last but not least, another big advantage of movies, TV, that kind of stuff, is that you get to pick up a lot of phrases. You're not seeing some words in isolation, you're actually picking up a lot of phrases that you can later insert into your own conversations. You're creating kind of a cheat sheet in your brain with all of the phrases you can use later when speaking. So you've built out your vocabulary. What next? What else do you need to speak well? You need to practice the skill of listening, because listening well means you're able to understand well. It's a crucial part of understanding. And then you cannot speak well if you don't understand well. Remember, speaking is a two-way street. It doesn't just happen like I'm doing right now at the camera, and I'm just speaking in sort of in a way that's giving a presentation almost. Most of the speaking that you would be interested in is actually a back and forth between two people or more. And so in that case, you need to really train your ear in order to be able to pick up as much of the language as possible. Really, speaking well is impossible without understanding well. In order to understand well, listening is a key factor. There's some things about the English language that make it tough. Of course, there's a lot of sounds that are difficult, such as the TH sound in words like the, or some things like the English R. If you're like me and you come from a country where, for example, your native R would be something like R, that's the Bulgarian one, and so learning the English R and learning a lot of the English sounds, that can be difficult depending on what your native language is. You're gonna find different sounds difficult. But pay attention. Pay attention to those sounds and pay attention to a lot of the idiosyncrasies of the English language when it comes to omitting certain syllables or certain sounds. What do I mean by that? I mean that rarely in English will you see a word that is pronounced completely and fully the way it is written. There's a lot of sounds that get eaten. So something like the word different, the way I'm pronouncing it, I'm not saying different or something of the sort. It's just different, or chocolate. I'm not pronouncing all of the sounds that you see on screen. Or a lot of the times in the English language, there's contractions. You know that you never hear somebody say I am. I mean, you would, but it's super rare. Most of the time people say I'm. Or a lot of the times you're gonna see a lot of abbreviations such as gotta go, I wanna do that, and things like that. And you really gotta train your ear to listen for that. Something else that you need to get used to and you need to pay attention to is filler words. Things like, literally, well, so, etc. There's so many, like some regions, I just did it, I just said like some. Okay, anyways, some regions of the US, for example, they use them much more than in others. Some are really local things. Same with other English-speaking countries. You're gonna hear different filler words in different locations, so it depends what variety of English is of your interest, who you're speaking to, etc. But you need to tune your ear to those and to understand how they're used in a sentence and what they mean. And something you also need to be attuned to is exaggeration. It really depends what country the speaker is coming from, but for example, in the US, you're gonna hear a lot of exaggeration. Something that you would not hear in many Slavic languages, for example. Things like, oh my god, I love you, or that is awesome, or like a lot of times people say interesting. They don't necessarily mean that something is interesting, or they don't necessarily mean that something is awesome. It could be just passable, but they will use that word. Or, the whole I love you thing, do not take it literally as you would in your culture, because a lot of the times you need to get used to that exaggeration and to keep in mind that the meaning that is conveyed by those highly exaggerated words and expressions and kind of, the vibe of a native English speaker, you need to be able to kind of tone it down when you're listening so you can understand it correctly. And so you can know that this is just the way that people speak and it's cultural, and so you can understand what it means and not take it literally, kind of learn to read between the lines. And my final tip in terms of understanding and listening and all of that is to focus on stress. If you have a hard time sometimes understanding native speakers because they speak super fast, like I do in my other videos, or because they have an accent you're not used to, they use a lot of words and kind of mix them together and they contract everything and they just speak in a way that is difficult for you, it's good to focus on the stress of the words. So focus on the stress syllable. Really, if once you start attuning your ear to the stress syllables, understanding spoken English becomes so much easier. The reason why that is because just the most important information is sometimes what is useful for your brain and it kind of connects the dots. And if you hear the stress syllables well, then even if a lot of other vowels or syllables are kind of not pronounced that well or they're changed by an accent, you're okay. It is a bit similar to how there's these, for example, memes where you see that a lot of the letters in a word are jumbled and just the first and the last letter are kept in their respective places, and then you're able to figure out the word just because your brain does it for you somehow, even though the letters in the middle are jumbled. It's kind of similar. If you focus on the stress of a word, you're going to be able to understand it. You're going to be able to figure it out by the stress syllable and kind of a few of the letters around it. So next time you find it difficult to understand a native English speaker, try to attune your ear to the stress and to the rhythm of the language. And that is also gonna help you later when you speak, because you're gonna be better attuned to the tune of the language, to the rhythm of the language, to the stress patterns, and you're gonna be able to speak in a more natural way with better pronunciation and who knows, maybe even better accent. Our third big theme is to practice. Once you know that you have that down, once you know that you have down the big vocabulary buildup that you've done, once you have also practiced understanding when native speakers are speaking, you're gonna practice the act of speaking itself, or of output. And a good start for that is shadowing. It is a very useful technique in which, for example, you put on a video or a series or a podcast and you repeat after the speaker. You try to imitate as well as you can the pronunciation, the intonation, the rhythm of the language, etc. And that way you practice your pronunciation, but you're also practicing putting up words together the way you would in a normal conversation. Shadowing can also take the form in singing along to songs, for example, because also music is a great way to learn because it really taps into emotions and helps you remember, so you can also do that kind of shadowing. If you want to be a bit more independent in terms of not simply repeating things, you can, for example, change the person. If somebody in a podcast is saying, I lived in India, you can then say he lived in India instead. So changing tenses or changing what person you're speaking about or changing some parts of the story can also be an alternative to shadowing, or you can outright retell a story in your own words, and that is a great way to practice. I don't mean here the usual reading comprehension exercises when it's like, what did Mary say to John? Where is the post office located? Blah, blah, blah. It's not, you don't have to actually remember the story even. Just retell whatever you remember. The parts you don't remember, you can even make them up. Who cares? It's about using your own words to tell a story. And you can simply retell another story or make up your own, it doesn't really matter. Another way to practice output is through writing. You can journal, for example, in English, or you can write short stories, you can write papers, whatever it is you really are into writing, it doesn't matter what it is. If you like to write, you can do that in English, because that is going to help you with speaking later, because every time you write, it is a little bit like you are doing one-way speaking in a way. Yes, you're not training your pronunciation unless you're reading out loud as you write, but you're still training that act of putting words together in a sentence, and words have to come to you, and they would the way they would in a normal conversation. So it is a different medium, but still you're forming sentences. And that is an important thing to practice. Speaking of your pronunciation, it is very important, of course, to do pronunciation practice. There's a lot of words that are famous and favorite quote unquote for English learners that are spelled in one way, pronounced completely differently. You need to learn how to pronounce those correctly. To give an example, I mean the famous trio of tough, through and thorough, and other similar ones like that. They can be very confusing. It's good to go over them and to learn to pronounce all the different combinations of sounds correctly. Also, tongue twisters can be super useful to make sure that you're getting used to the new sounds, especially if your native language is very different phonetically speaking from English. Tongue twisters can be great to master those English sounds. But then also, it could be a good idea to record yourself and then play that recording, because sometimes when you are speaking, you're not realizing how you're pronouncing certain things, but when you record yourself and listen to it after, you can spot a lot of mistakes that you can then correct. The next tip is to practice with native speakers. That can be scary, but remember, it is okay. You don't have to be perfect to practice, because we get better with practice. So find a native speaker with whom you can practice in person. If you already live in an English-speaking country, that's great. If not, I'm sure there's English-speaking people where you live, because most of the time, especially in big cities, that's not that hard to find. And that is actually the good thing about English speakers. They're everywhere. And they also don't have to be native. You can also practice with somebody that already speaks English well. And if you are looking for somebody online, you can use different apps. You can use the comment section below this video, for example, to find a language exchange partner for yourself. You can also join a speaking club. That can be super useful. There are several of those online. Of course, there's many options. And let me know if you would be interested of a speaking club, because that is something that I could create. If you find that this is something that you would want to practice, I'd love to help you. Another thing that is super low-key is practicing with Siri, Alexa, software like that. It can be easy because it is super comfortable, especially if you're shy, to start out that way and to break down your barriers before you speak to an actual person. Something else that is great to do is to try to think in a foreign language. And this is easier said than done, because sometimes our brain defaults to the easiest language that is easiest for us to think in. You know, be it our native language or the language we work in like all day long. Most of the times it's one of those. So it is a little bit tricky, but if you want to practice, you can, when you catch yourself thinking about something, you can try to switch that train of thought into English. And then once you've done that, it's super useful because you know what words are not coming to your head. You can look them up, you can try to say things in a different way, etc. So it is a little bit like speaking practice, but you're just doing it in your head. Another low-key way, if you're feeling shy to speak, is that you can also pretend to be a podcast guest, for example, or whatever interview you come across. Answer the questions that the interviewer is asking and answer them in your own words about your own life. That is really effective at times because you don't have the added pressure of another person in the room with you and you have to speak and you're worried, am I making mistakes, etc. And so that can be really good to take off the pressure before you learn to have those conversations, that you can do it in the comfort of your own home and just practice some answers and some sample conversations, which leads me to topic-based learning. And topic-based learning is very important. I've had some comments on my channel about how are you able to speak about this and that so well, and I actually had that comment from a native speaker who was impressed by the way that I speak in front of the camera, and he's like, how are you able to do that? Well, the truth is, it's practice. It's public speaking, presentation practice, debate practice, etc. That's how. I'm not sure I would do so well in front of the camera in Bulgarian, which is my native language. I would probably not do so well because I don't have that vocabulary that I've built in English, for example, scientific vocabulary or business vocabulary. Because my education was in English, a lot of the business vocabulary is missing in Bulgarian, and I wouldn't really necessarily know how to say a lot of the stuff that I say every single day in English. So what I mean by that is really, if you're interested to use English in certain environments, practice using English in those environments. Practice the vocabulary from those environments. That is how you learn. That is how you become a really eloquent speaker, by practicing those things, by practicing on the topics that matter to you. Which is actually the problem I have sometimes with language learning at language schools, or at regular school with classes, because a lot of the times they decide what's interesting, they decide what's relevant, and we all have different topics that are relevant for us. So practice the topics that you care about. And last but not least, debates. Debates can be a great way. I did debates in high school mostly, and I think maybe a little bit in college as well. But if you do debates, it's super useful to bump up your skills. I'm not sure what options there are for adults to do debates, but if you want to do formal debates on certain topics, that can be so useful. You can even create a debate club with your friends. You know, if you're out of school at this point, if you're a working professional, you can partner up with somebody else that's learning English and just debate different topics. That is super useful to develop your English skills. And it certainly helped me a lot, and it certainly helped a lot of people that I know really jumpstart their English speaking skills. It's super useful. Give it a go. And the last big theme I want to cover today is the importance of psychology. What do I mean by psychology? I mean the way that you're approaching speaking English. Rule number 1, forget about making mistakes. We think that it is a huge deal if we make mistakes. If we don't make mistakes, we never get better. Everybody makes mistakes. Every language learner I know makes mistakes. It's not just the average language learner. You might be thinking, oh, probably polyglots don't. No, polyglots make mistakes all of the time. All of them that I know make mistakes all the time, because that is the process of learning a language. And it's really important to give up perfectionism, to give up this need to be perfect before you can speak, because then you'll never speak. Because in order to be perfect at speaking, or really good, right? Perfect maybe, like nobody's perfect, but in order to be super good at speaking, you need to be bad at speaking first. You need to start somewhere. It doesn't just happen like that. You need to be able to build up that skill. In order to be able to build up that skill, you need to be okay with making mistakes, because trust me, native speakers, they're not gonna make fun of you. Unless somebody is mean for no good reason, then of course, but most of the time it's people are going to be patient with you, and it's okay to make mistakes, because what's important is that you're communicating. If you're able to communicate, that's all that matters. Making mistakes is no big deal also because it means that this is your second language. You are already able to speak fluently and eloquently in your native language, so you're able now to communicate in another language, in English. What's the big deal whether or not you make mistakes? The important thing is that you learn to speak in another language, and that is a huge feat in and of itself. Another tip is not to care about your accent that much. It's no big deal. You can hear that I'm not a native English speaker, but I've never ever cared about an accent. Having an accent, making sure I sound like an American or a British person or Australian, whatever. Never have I cared about things like that, because it doesn't matter. You can have a great accent. Some people are super good at imitating accents. What does that mean? It doesn't mean you're very good at the language. I'll give you an example. I have been complimented on my Greek accent so many times. From the first week, I was able to have a really good Greek accent, almost sounding native-like. And with time it only got better, but my Greek, no, I'm not fluent. I'm not. It's at the intermediate level. So how good you are at speaking and at being able to express yourself doesn't really matter. My Greek accent might be better than my English accent, but I'm able to speak so much better in English and on so many more topics and just give presentations, etc. Anything. Whereas in Greek, that's not the case. So accent, whatever, it doesn't really matter as much. What matters is that you have the correct pronunciation, because good pronunciation means people are able to understand you. If you have bad pronunciation, people are not going to be able to understand you. But whether or not you sound like a native, you don't have to sound like a native. Well, unless you want to. If you want to, then you can work on your accent. But I just personally never found the need to. Another tip here to get over yourself and limiting beliefs, if you have any, and worries of making mistakes and stuff like that, a great thing is an alter ego, and I've talked about it in other videos. It's a wonderful technique. You can have an English-speaking alter ego, give it a story, like what country is he or she from, etc., and have that. It can be super useful also with having an accent. If you want to have an accent, a native sounding accent, an alter ego can help you achieve that, can help you get over yourself, can help you be more confident. So check out my video on the topic if you want to learn more about that. And last tip of advice, last but certainly not least, remember, you are very lucky. Because English is currently the global lingua franca. English, you're never going to be in the situation with that language in which you're struggling to find people to practice with, you're struggling to find resources or good content, good comprehensible input, that's never gonna happen with English, because it's everywhere, it's all around us, which means that in order to speak well, you can do it. You have the access to all of the tools, all of the tips I'm giving you in this video for speaking English. Maybe if you were learning another language that's, you know, much more obscure, you would not be able to put those tools into practice, at least not all of them. But you are learning English and you're learning to speak English, so you're super lucky with that. Trust me, it's a luxury that many of us that are into language learning don't get with other languages. So, you know, keep that in mind and surround yourself with English. It's all around us, it's everywhere in our working lives, in entertainment, in popular culture, truly everywhere. So make sure that you surround yourself with English all the time, every single day, and see how much that helps with your speaking skills. As always, let me know in the comments below if you have any questions. I love to have you here. Thank you for watching this video to the very end. Like and subscribe if you stayed up until the very end, so I know if you're one of the special ones that watch it in full. And stay tuned for more videos on my channel. Let me know if you have any requests, and I will see you very, very soon. And check out on the other couple of videos that I have coming up for you in order to learn more about how to learn languages. Bye bye.